Before we get into the video, just a quick word for Nexon. Please don't ban me, but if you do, I understand. Second, even if you do ban me, can you please remove the casting animation for electric condense? It forces you out of sprint, changes your field of view, and yeah, my main bunny build for Season 1, which I'll be discussing later, would feel perfect with this very small change. Thanks. If you're watching this video more than 1 week after its publication, chances are the clever use of game mechanics you're about to see has been patched out. Don't worry, I'm going to go over the best bunny build that doesn't rely on this later on. For now though, let's talk about electric condense. Electric condense is somewhat unique as a skill. It has an initial 1 second cast animation followed by 5 seconds of channeling. Once the channeling is finished, it detonates in an AoE and deals just shy of 2000% of our skill damage. I've been using this skill for over a month now, but mainly for its movement speed buff effect. A few days ago, I was spamming the skill to try and activate it as quickly as possible for damage and noticed something quite strange. It dealt the damage twice. Naturally, I had to test this further, and as you can probably guess, you can activate it a lot more than just twice. For some reason, the game lets you detonate the ability multiple times before it finally realizes that it's on cooldown, and each one of those detonations deals damage. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to put together a build that took advantage of this mechanic. Note that you do not need to have a fully juiced build in order to make this work. Even minimal module switching on Bunny ought to kill literally any boss in the game that isn't a Colossus, and with specialization we can take down anything except Gluttony with one burst. You can probably refine this build even further for Gluttony, but since it'll be patched out, I opted not to go down this path. Perhaps with some support Lunar stuff and some other switches, Gluttony could also be killed instantly. Feel free to try. Let's talk about the Colossus killing build, starting with the modules. We're going for maximal damage and cooldown here. Cooldown is useful since in some instances it won't one-shot the Colossus. Based on my testing, it doesn't seem to influence the number of times we can detonate EC, but it's a useful insurance policy. The 4 crit modules are self-explanatory, as is focus on electric. You can get slightly more damage from electric specialist, but I prefer the cooldown. The same is true for focus on singular. EC is fusion, so this is literally just a cooldown module. I could switch polarity here, but since the multiplier on EC is so high anyway, it wouldn't be a meaningful damage upgrade. Dangerous Ambush was nice against Gluttony, but that's it. Everything else died without needing it. I farmed an electric and fusion reactor in Vespers, the lumberyard, on the frontline base mission. Any mounting is fine, I have gold skill attack when attacking Colossi, and that's all that really matters. Again, since this will be fixed, I didn't opt to invest hours into farming one with a secondary role of crit damage, skill power boost ratio, or anything like that. For external components, I've gone with full Slayer set for its skill power increase. I do want to stress that outside of Gluttony, you probably won't need this unless you're really struggling to get damage from other sources. Okay, now that we're set up, let's talk about how to actually deal damage. We need to hammer Z dozens of times against Colossi to make this work, and that's just not possible. If you want to play this game strictly ethically, you can unbind scroll wheel down or up from weapon switching and instead set it as a secondary keybind to electric condense. If you have a free spinning mouse wheel, this feels incredible and you'll have no problems dealing serious damage with it. This is how I use the build. If you don't have a free spinning mouse wheel, you might want to find some other solution to this problem. All we're trying to do here is press Z as fast as possible for around half a second. I'm sure you'll be able to come up with something. In Colossus fights, start by building up as much electric as possible, then activate electric condense and move around until your electric bar is full. This really increases the damage you'll do, since each 10% increase multiplies our final damage. Before the skill runs out, simply spin your scroll wheel, or any other method you've come up with to press a button dozens of times in quick succession, and the boss should die. Even against Molten Fortress, which has strong resistance to electricity, I was able to one-tap him for 70 million damage. Gluttony isn't so friendly. He has high crit resistance, which makes this fight touch and go, especially since we can die with literally 0 defense. Still, it tends to trivialize the fight, as long as others can manage the balls. Let me know if you find a way to consistently kill it as soon as it spawns, and I'll pin a comment about it. Sharon can reduce electric resistance and Luna can buff, so maybe those two with 2 bunnies is optimal. Again, this will be fixed, probably pretty soon after this video goes live, but that doesn't mean the fun ends. I've looked at dozens of build guides for Bunny and none of them seem to appreciate just how good electric condense is, even without this secret technology. For people who followed my last video, I'm still running pretty much the same setup, but with a few optimizations. Let's go over my current build in detail. Note that contrary to the build you just saw, this is optimized for running infiltrations and field missions. Although Bunny is currently the best bosser by a huge margin, it will be short-lived, so I really wouldn't bother chucking any catalyst into her for this, unless you're really just looking to have fun. Thankfully, the build I do recommend can do this EC spam as well. My regular setup, 1 or 2 shots all solo Colossi, so I suggest for going for this setup instead, unless you're really invested in trying to insta-kill Gluttony or anything else. For most hard mode content, this is the module setup that I run. This gives us infinite uptime on electric condense, so the 20% sprint speed increase feels really comfortable. If you find yourself dying a lot, you can switch in HP amplification instead of skill extension. For group content, where the odd death here or there doesn't matter, I'd run skill extension. The duration increases the channel time on EC, so it ends up lasting just under 8 seconds. Note that a lot of our health comes from the Inversion passive, which was also just buffed. I also think that selective recovery instead of MP collector might be optimal if you have a good sensor. I tend to find I run over blue orbs quite often, and with the 60% increase in the recovery that they give, it's an immediate bar of MP. It also increases the passive regeneration we have in our sensor. I'm able to run for a full 53 seconds with this setup before needing any MP. It also increased the proc of selective neurostimulation on the Inversion passive tree, so every minute we're getting at least 23% of our MP back too. I'd only run this if I had a high rolled MP recovery in combat and flat MP sensor. It's the same polarity as MP collector too, so if you don't like it and it's not working for you, just switch back to MP collector. My reactor is electric and singular with a thunder cage mounting and substats of cooldown and duration. Without any duration modules and HP amplification instead of skill extension, it's on cooldown for about half a second between casts. Please note that electric condense is fusion, but we want the damage on our lightning emission to be maximized, so we grab singular instead of fusion for this setup. I don't rate any set bonuses enough to suggest that you farm them for hours on end, but 2 pieces of Annihilator for the 5.7% duration is quite nice. Since EC lasts for 5 seconds by default, this is almost 300 milliseconds longer on the duration. Note that this does come at the cost of some survivability, which makes the non-HP amplification setup even more risky. But I've ran it for quite a while now and it feels absolutely fine. I really rarely die. Adjust as you see fit. If you don't want to take Annihilation, go with the following. Auxiliary power, you want a HP base with MP recovery out of combat and max HP. For your sensor, you want a HP or def base with MP recovery in combat and max MP. For your memory, you want a HP or def base with MP recovery modifier and def. For your processor, you want a HP base with any substats. They're all pretty bad, but shield is probably best. If you do run Annihilation, grab the memory and then either the sensor or the processor. I think I like the def on the sensor more than I like the HP upgrade going for the processor and then picking out a HP sensor instead of the default def on the Slayer processor. I currently run this Inversion passive tree. Hunk gives us increased HP and damage reduction, recovery gives us MP every 30 seconds, and 3 seconds of debuff immunity every 60 seconds. MP bump every minute is by far the best, so get this as a priority. The HP is also super useful if you go for the squishy build, but if you take HP amplification, it's going to be really difficult for you to die. If you do run this build, I recommend double jumping before you cast Electric Condense. The skill itself is a net gain for the distance travel regardless of whether or not you jump, but you do slow down during its casting animation, and it feels really, really bad. This is negated by double jumping just before because it keeps your momentum, but the FOV still changes and it doesn't feel or look good. Thankfully, Nexon is going to patch the multiple damage issue and completely remove the casting animation in the next patch, so it will feel much better regardless of whether or not you jump before casting it. You can also put on Brisk Walk on your weapon for free movement speed. It procs on your lightning emission, so it's a free 10% MS buff every 15 seconds. You can actually run this on all 3 weapons, but I won't rehash how to do that. Watch my previous money build if you're curious. I also run Thunder Cage as default for now. Afterglow to delete bosses after the nerf to EC will probably be optimal, but I don't have one to show you just yet, since I really haven't shot enemy in the last week because I've been playing this build. That's pretty much it for this video. After using this build for so long, I cannot go back to any other setup on Bunny. Everything feels insanely bad in comparison, even running high voltage. It's the fastest Bunny build possible, and the nuke damage from Electric Condense is really nice against bosses, even without the to be patched trick that I discovered. I do want to say that while I could have saved this for the next boss to drop, I felt like it was a good idea to publish this build before then. just in case someone else knew about it and decided to share it to assist with clearing. I don't think the devs were too happy about Gluttony being trivialized with the Kale bomb trick when it was released, and I think people going through the whole leaving Q thing unless they get a bunny would be pretty bad for the game. It sucked with Kale and Gluttony, so I figured that sooner rather than later was the best approach to this. That said, there's an even crazier trick than this one, but that's for another video. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe for more TFD content in the future.